All right, so good morning. I talk pretty loudly. I don't need a microphone. So I'm Tim Wright. I'm the historian of Oskosh Truck. Know quite a bit about FWD, and it says on the program that I'm going to give the presentation today, but I'm going to participate in a little bit of it. I've got more somebody that can do this presentation just like I can, but over here to my left is Chad Stamps. Chad is the great-grandson of William Besserdick. For those that don't know, and you'll learn more about William Besserdick as he gives the presentation today, William was the inventor of the four-wheel drive system. He was partners with Otto Zacco in Clintonville. So Chad's going to do this presentation today. We tag-teamed this presentation last year at the Oskosh Library. So we've refined it some. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chad. So Chad, it's all yours.
Well, Tim is still going to be presenting because obviously Oshkosh wasn't all about William. There was also B.A. Mosling, and so I'll have you talk about that part of it and some of the other pieces. Good morning, and thank you for having me come out here and talk to you guys. The early years of Oshkosh, it's interesting. I never knew much about Oshkosh Truck. Growing up, my grandpa worked for FWD. He was vice president of sales. Even though my grandma was William's daughter, we didn't talk much about Oshkosh. So it wasn't until I met Tim that I understood just what a part my great-grandpa had in starting up Oshkosh Truck. So a lot of the information I have here is brought to us by Tim, because Tim and I have talked about this. There will be quotations in here from William. We have documentation of William, kind of notes and memoirs that he has in there and discussing this. So some of the time I'm going to be just reading what his quotes are just because it explains better what's going on. It comes directly from the man himself. But really this is going to be talking about William, his background, talking about how it started with FWD, because that's just as important as how Oshkosh started too. And you'll hear how the two of them are pretty much intertwined. So we'll start off, just a little bit about his history and who he is. And Tim puts us on the presentations. Basically, neither of us work for Oshkosh Corp, so we're not presenting on behalf of them. The information that we have is presented from the years of research that we have, and I can say Tim has a lot more years than I do, but it is something that both of us have, joined our heads on and have put the history first. So we try to present to you with the best accuracy we have, and treat it. And we know that history it can be different from different sources that you hear it from. We also look for feedback. So if we learn something new, we'll be willing to change it. And we just want you to know, so it's not the end-all be-all, but it's constantly evolving. We also like to dedicate this presentation to a few people. We have Clarence Inky Youngworth, huge mentor for Tim. Historian of Oshkosh Truck, and though I never met him, I felt like I know him. My mom, Shyla, she's up at the top, and she passed away a couple years ago. And then Bill Hupke, who you can see up there on the top. Bill, basically, is known as Mr. FWD. He did everything for the museum up in Clintonville, and he just passed away recently. We also want to thank FWD. Why do we want to thank FWD for the history of Oshkosh? Well, a couple of reasons. One, without Walter Olin, who was the president of FWD, and Peter Battenberg, who was hired to be the engineer, there would be no Oshkosh Truck. And we'll talk about that and why that happened, all right? The history of Oshkosh Truck, it is intertwined with FWD's. They are separate histories, but they are very much intertwined, okay? And the one common denominator between both of them is my great-grandfather, William Besserdick, who founded both companies. So there's a picture of William. He was born in South Milwaukee, May 4th in 1867. Didn't spend much time there. The family moved around, but they ended up settling in Appleton, Wisconsin. That's where he did most of his schooling, where the family was brought up, until he was 16, which was the 8th grade at the time. And so after that, that's kind of when you graduate. After that, he went on and said, well, what am I going to do? And he had some aptitude for mechanical stuff, and so he went on and became an apprentice at a machinist shop in Appleton, known as Morgan and Bassett. He was there for 3 years. While he was there, he ended up learning all about machine trade, how to use the tools, the principles behind it, He was looking for more information on that, and so while he was there, they actually recommended, hey, why don't you take correspondence school through Scranton School of Correspondence? So he took a theoretical mechanical instruction through Scranton School as part of his education when he was working at Morgan and Bassett. And in his memoirs, he talked about how he, being a young man, not being tied down, that he decided, hey, I have wanderlust. I want to see what else is out there. And so he decided, well, I got to get out of here. I'm going to go see what else is there. At the time, the biggest mechanical machines that are out there would be the railroad. And so he decided to follow the railroad and see where it took him. Anything you see, again, in quotations is actually William's words, okay? So he dreamt about going around the different shops and learning the different ways in which it was done. He started off going to Chicago, Lakeshore, and Western, the shops in Kaukauna, Wisconsin Central, which was in Waukesha, Union Pacific. This is where he started going west, and this is where the railroad had pushed to the west. One of the big things was the conditions were not great. And a lot of it, they weren't even states. They were still called Indian Territory at the time. So he didn't spend a lot of time in some of these shops, maybe 6, 8 months. One shop he only spent overnight and left because the conditions were so bad. So he basically cut his teeth by working in a lot of different conditions and in a lot of different machinery. And so, eventually making it through Santa Fe to Topeka, and decided to come back, But one thing that he did get from that is he had special training on a lot of different tools, right? So a lot of mechanical knowledge on how things could get done. He started heading back. He stopped off. He had a cousin that was down in Milwaukee, and they said, well, if you're interested, you could work at a coreless engine factory for a while. So I think he stayed there for just less than a year. It was still steam engines. This was what he was used to using, right, working on the railroad. But he said, well, I learned a little bit, and then he decided to go back to Appleton. I'm almost 100% sure he went back to Morgan and Bassett, but there could have been another machine shop there that he went to. So that kind of brought him back full circle, all right? How did he get to Clintonville, all right? And Tim talked about this yesterday a little bit. I'm just going to touch on it. But this is the machine shop there. William, with his brother-in-law, Otto Zacco, started this. He got pulled into it because of the lumber and milling that was going on in Clintonville and the need for fixing machines. And so they were constantly corresponding with the machine shop in Appleton. Pulled him in, said, hey, would you like to work here? I know we'd have a lot of work. We can put your name around to the surrounding communities. And that's how it happened. So officially they opened for business in January of 1892. And one thing I want to tell people is that William and Otto were in business for nearly 14 years prior to the development of the four-wheel drive concept. So it's not like this just happened overnight, right? They worked for years together in the community, were part of the community working on stuff before this happened. And that developing the FWD concept became somewhat of a hobby at first because they still had to earn money and still had to run the shop. So this was also mentioned a little bit yesterday about the Rio car. In 1906, William and Otto purchased Clintonville's first horseless carriage, which was known as the Rio. It was a 10-horse little Rio runabout. Part of it was that they were just interested in the new machines, and they could afford one, so they got one. Also, the idea that you could buy, you could sell them, and then you could also maintain them as well, being a machine shop. But again, because the roads were so bad, it wasn't quite the ideal dream that we have today. The horseless carriage was quite the marvel, but the streets, the roads, everything else was not very friendly to a little two-wheel drive vehicle like this. And it got hard. It got really tricky getting stuck in sand, mud, dirt, and depending on what the weather was. So in the summer of 1906, two men stopped into the machine shop. They had a threshing machine just about 1.5 miles north of Embarrass that broke down in the field. They asked, said, William, would you come out here and take a look at it? He's like, yes. But he said, why don't you leave your horses here, jump on the Rio with me, and we'll drive out there together, and we'll go fix it, and then I'll, bring one of you back, and you can bring the horses back out there. So it was a little spot right off of Highway 22, Sandy Hill, where it got stuck. And so in William's words, I told these men, I said to each of you, take a hold of each of the spokes of this little Rio and give it a lift. They are the ones that are holding it back. It ain't the ones that you see that are trying to get out, which they did. It was amazing how quickly that little car jumped out of there. Away she went. They kept on until we got going up the hill, helping it. So there the idea of the four-wheel drive was born, right there on that spot. And we have a pretty good idea of where it was, just north of Embarrass, you know, and I'd been driving past it for years, and not until meeting with Tim did we really realize where this was. So that's kind of the story behind how it happened. And it was a July of 1906. You know, well, I pondered that all the way home, driving along, and I had it solved before I even got back to Clintonville, just exactly how it could be done. And this is William's words. And in his earlier training, and this is why the apprenticeship is important as far as you know, even going into Oshkosh, his apprenticeship, we used to have what they called in these knuckles, right? And so also known as universals, we'll just put a knuckle in front of them wheels, same kind we would whittle together, just bolt together when you were a kid now and then. Go at any angle, drive shaft at any angle, put that in there, and there you got it. So he got that knowledge from working on the railroad, from using universal joints, and that's where he applied that in his mind to be able to apply power to the front wheels and still spin and still turn. So as he got back, I explained it to Zacho, gave him the experience I just had going up that hill in the sand, giving these men a little bit of power in the front wheels. Why don't we figure out and meddle on all these ideas and get the parts and materials that we have to have, and the rest we'll build ourselves. And so that's what they did. Now, they had two patents that they applied for, and you can see it was, you know, July of 1906. They applied for it in January of 1907. So 6 months of working on it, just trying to get the idea fleshed out, getting it going. We had two of them. One was for the axle, which is what we, you know, allow the wheels to turn, and that's what you see behind you on the screen. And the other one was the power applying mechanism, which basically was a transfer case that had the power go to all four wheels from the transfer case. The first official FWD was known as the steamer, okay? And this is the first prototype that they developed. This is actually taken in Clintonville. It was in or December of 1908. The body of the vehicle was made by them, and same with the transfer case and the knuckles for the wheels. Everything else they were sourcing from other locations. But they realized that you know, if we're going to have to power this thing, they knew steam. They got the steam engine, and it just was not good. I mean, not just in the winter, but just in general. So we put that in, come quite along heavy snow, and we tried it out. She would run 2 to 3 rods. Then we'd have to wait until the steam collects. And then you got to start. That's no good at all, stating that steam engine is out. And so the steamer, it did provide a successful principle because it did move, and it did go on all four wheels, but it just did not have the power that they needed. So that's where they had to find a new power source. So they got a Continental 60 horsepower engine that would drive it on all four wheels. You know, and that they hooked it up, and it went really well. Now, it's not like everything was figured out. They still did a lot of testing with this and drove it in all sorts of conditions and had to make adjustments to it. But you can see what the battleship looked like before it had any body on it, and when they were out there testing. And so, and on the picture, that is. You want to?
Yeah, in the front, it's Walter Olin. Behind the steering wheel with the goggles on is William Besserdick. The gentleman sitting next to him, I'm still trying to figure that out, but Otto Zacco is the one in the hat with the glasses in the left rear, and then DJ Rohr's on the right rear. Yep.
So while replacing the engine, you know, gave it more power, the controlling of that power became tricky. So one of the things that Williams was talking about was that they had to shift some things over. The trunnions and the spokes originally centered needed to be offset. The power, because the steering wheel would jerk and it was really hard to control. So they were constantly testing it, trying to see if they could break things, try to see if they could improve things, but also to try to make sure that it operated as smoothly as it possibly could. So there was a place where in theory and practice they did not agree. Any idea you get it into practice often shows up in theory where it is wrong, and you have to revise it and you have to overcome it. And so that was Williams' background and wanting to say, hey, you know what, I want this thing to be perfect. He spent a lot of time working through the details, and one of the main successes that FWD had eventually with this principle is that a lot of the kinks had already been worked out, where other truck companies may have had four-wheel drive vehicles, but they kept breaking or they did not have all the kinks worked out. So there's a picture of us. You probably saw this yesterday if you were there. That's my family in the battleship with Tim. But one of the things about the battleship that was, you know, the rigorous testing came all across the state of Wisconsin. You know, you would, not only were you trying to go and test it, but you're also trying to sell this as a product. You know, Marion and you know, Antigo, Fond du Lac, and all the way to Wapaka, you know, in different weather conditions. This was really key because William believed that if you did not push the limits of the machine, you would not find out what it could do. And I thought this was interesting. During the 1910 driving season, not less than 116 conventionally driven cars were pulled out of the mud holes by the battleship. And it never stalled, and it never asked for help in the 12,000 miles of grueling road tests. Now, that's not, 12,000 miles is a lot to put on in general, but on those roads in that day, it's an awful lot of miles. And again, if something broke or failed, it became an opportunity to make it better. And the main thing about the battleship was that it wasn't just a prototype, but it was what all the vehicles were based on, and it was the face of the company. Like everyone, you know, who saw this battleship perform, that became the face of the company. And it was a big investment tool. He shopped it around. People would see what it would do, buy stock, and that's how they ended up building FWD from the ground up. It wasn't a truck company that already existed. It came from the ground up, and they built it as something separate. So funding was really important. And if you want to talk about
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the other side of the partnership. So after William had successfully made the four-wheel drive and left FWD, he had a great concept. He was ready to start building a new vehicle, but William wasn't a rich man. He left FWD selling all his shares of stock, so he needed a financial investor. That financial investor come from Bernhard Andreas Mosling. Everybody knows him as B.A. Mosling. He was a young lad. When William started Oshkosh, he was 50 years old. So in William's own words, he wanted to take a young man that was good with business that could take a pounding, take a beating. So William went and talked to B.A. and talked to John Mosling, B.A.'s dad, and sold them on the idea. So what they ended up doing is they bought half the patent rights that William had. So the Moslings come from Mosling, Wisconsin. This is their family store in Mosling, Wisconsin. This is 1910 that they were over in Mosling. This is the family store, the Mosling store. Mosling had a railroad. One of the key factors is this railroad line does end up in Clintonville and goes through Clintonville. This is another shot of a downtown. I believe this was 1907, 1908 picture from downtown Mosling. Here's the Mosling store again. Pretty big store for a small town and small community. The Moslings were very, very successful in their business adventures.
Building still there?
The building has long been gone. So one of the cool things is B.A. Mosling was just an entrepreneur. Before he started in the truck business, he also was a licensed embalmer in the state of Wisconsin.
So I can...
With the Moslings, one of the key things is they didn't really know each other. They were in Mosling, Wisconsin, but in 1912, 1913, the Moslings moved to Clintonville and started a mercantile. It was where the old Spearbaker mercantile was. It was downtown. That building is no longer standing in Clintonville either. So that's how they got to know. They would go in and buy stuff from the Moslings mercantile in Clintonville, and that's how William knew that B.A. and his father made good business partners and made good business sense because they had this large mercantile in Clintonville.
Yeah. So that was kind of been the Mosling backstory. And so part of the question is, why did William leave FWD? Okay. And so there was multiple factors that went into this. One of the biggest ones, and like I said at the beginning, we thank Olin and we thank Battenberg for creating such a situation that William didn't feel welcome. And in spring of 1911, FWD hired this manager and engineer Battenberg. What ended up happening was William, who had invented this concept, who had worked it through, he and Zacco were basically being pushed to the side. William was in charge of sales. He was still one of the largest stockholders, but his design, Battenberg was redesigning what he was doing, and it was having multiple failures, and he was getting frustrated with it. And it was disappointing to see something that he worked so hard on start to fail. Then in July of 1911, Otto, his business partner, ended up selling his stock without notifying William. And the hard part about that is between William and Otto, they had controlling interest in the stock. While William was still the largest stockholder, he did not have controlling interest. And so then the direction of the company, the direction of his invention was not up to him anymore. And so that was frustrating. There were also other disappointments in the way the business was put together, the board of trustees, the way that the direction of the company was going. And there was a push in about 1912 to actually move from Clintonville to Appleton, and William, being one of the largest stockholders, was not behind it, but he was in favor of it because they were afraid that the town, being so small, did not have the resources to be able to support that business, with the population. But there was one main key aspect that he talks about in his memoirs that really happened, that pushed him over the edge. And that was in December of 1911. William met with Olin in Battenberg at the shop to take a look at the Scout car and assess the development of the newly designed Model B. This situation, William was already kind of on edge. Olin's like, we're having problems with things breaking down. They were going to do the Scout car that they were going to send to the U.S. government for testing, which meant, it was successful, but it was breaking down on the shop room floor. And William had nothing to do with the designs on any of these things. And unfortunately, when they met, Olin showed him plans for the new Model B and asked what he thought, and I thought this was really great. What did William really think? Well, he thinks it's the greatest abortion of a piece of mechanical electrical engineering I ever laid my eyes on. So, in all my years, that Battenberg has designed there, that's what I think of it. I can see all the same failures that I just went through with you. They're all involved in there again. So if they're going to be a failure there, then they're going to be a failure there, wouldn't they? And what he's talking about here is that a lot of the knuckles, the angles of the way the things were attached were not how he had designed them. They tried going a different direction, and things kept failing. William had this knowledge because of how he grew up, as a machinist, and they weren't listening to him, and so he was frustrated. And you know what his answer was? This is Olin. Won't that be a good thing? That'll give us a lot of business in parts. And that was this is William saying, that was an absolute facts. I am willing to swear that before anything that you would put before me. I swear them there was absolute facts. And that was disappointing to William because his goal was not to necessarily produce a business that would fail because, in replacing parts, he wanted to make something that was strong and that would last. And so that kind of put him over the edge. After I had this latest session with this man Battenberg and Olin, I left there so thoroughly disgusted. Well, I made up my mind that I was going to save the four-wheel drive principle somehow. Even if I had to get some other patents, I immediately started to dispose of my stock in the company, and I got busy designing another truck following the pattern of my first Battleship four-wheel drive design, which had proven so successful. So right here, this is where the paths diverged. There was no FWD or Oshkosh spinoff of FWD. They were two separate paths completely.
What year was this?
This was in 1910, right? No, 1911. Sorry.
1911, 1912.
Yeah. So, yep. So it was right for the Scout car. Hold on a second here. When did I say? Yeah. So December of 1911 is when that happened. So, and what I put there is condensed compared to how he went on this. He could explain exactly what was going on, but I didn't want to bore everyone with it. But it was, it was pretty painful to him to see his concept be, whittled down to like spare parts. So in 1912, Otto had no longer retained any stock, and William, still had majority stock. They were still working for FWD, right? But there was a responsibility, if they were still working there, that if any redesigns to the original patent would take place, that would be company, property. William and Otto had recently redesigned the ball and socket with adding a bearing. It was only then that Zocco's name, and it still had, they only pulled it in Zocco's name because it still had issues functioning under that load. But what William says is, so I figured if this patent that we had just thought of as a ball and socket was patented under Zocco's name, was still inefficient, and it had bearing contact with the ball and socket, and there was a 5-inch ball in the socket, and you could take and put a load on it, and it had just those bearings. It steers so hard, you could hardly steer it, which was true. So that was my cue. I said, I must devise some means to overcome that and have a practical patent which could steer easy. So that's where Oshkosh Truck starts, is from this patent on, okay? So he's redesigning things that are failing, continuing with his mindset on how he can make things better, and that's when he was able to get a patent. So, and like you were saying, in 1912, the Moslings moved to Clintonville, and William had been keeping an eye on this, and during the whole time, and looking for a business partner, and thinking, if I'm going to do something, that we want, move ahead. Who am I going to move ahead with, right? So we jump ahead to 1914. This is when William actually disposed of all of his stock. Okay, and if you take a look at the time it takes to get patent approved from application to approval, it's usually about a year and a half. Roughly, it can sometimes take a little bit longer. I don't have the information on this, but we were thinking about it that, if he applied for that patent in 1912, that by 1914 he probably knew that he had received it. So he felt safe in saying, hey, I can move on, and take this patent and make a new truck company. So, and that new patent was on June 7, 1912, and that's basically the timeline. In the beginning of May of 1914, FWD hired a firm of Irwin and Wheeler to dismiss Williams' patent based on infringement, but nothing ever amounted to it. FWD never fought this in court. They didn't have a case. All right, so 1914, 1915, William looks for help in starting a new company. It's a pretty large proposition for one man to handle and organize in a corporation. Now realize William was a little more advanced in age at the time, so to start up a whole second truck company is an awful lot of work, and starting it from the ground up is a big deal. So again, he'd been watching the Moslings. They ran their mercantile establishment, and he wanted to basically just take care of the mechanical end of it, the developing of it, the designing of it, his idea, and then let someone else take care of the business end. And so that's where B.A. Mosling came in. And again, if I could conclude, I get a man of this type. He is very much younger than I am. Had already gone through enough to tire one man. I already had the patent and got another patent so he could start just the same as the four-wheel drive here. And that, I think, is the key, is just how four-wheel drive started is very much how Oshkosh started, right? From the ground up, starting with a patent, raising money, and be able to develop a new truck company, and shopping around and seeing who would be willing to host it. So practically the same. Start from the ground floor, put out a practical truck, and the commercial industry can use. And so then this is the agreement, right?
That is the agreement.
That's a copy of the actual agreement. You can see their signatures at the bottom. So in 1915. March 2nd, the application for the steering mechanism, which is basically what he redesigned, was renewed, and assumed that BA was added to the patent. So if you can see up at the top, it says that it was renewed on June 2nd, and then the patent wasn't released until September 7th. So we think that's what was happening, because on March 5th, William and BA signed that agreement. So that's why the patent didn't come through right away. So they had both their names on it. And then September 7th, William received the patent. And that's the actual copy you got, right? So,
How come Otto's name wasn't on there?
what's that? Otto's Akko?
Yeah.
Well, this is after Otto. They were on the original patent. This is the revised patent that William pulled after he left FWD.
So Otto has nothing to do with his.
Nothing. Nope. He actually had nothing to do with FWD until, because he had sold all of his stock. He was just there because he was working there. And he had the machine shop, if I remember right. He went back and worked in the machine shop for many years.
So Otto divested of his stock.
Before William did, yes. Yeah. It was 1910, right? Or, yeah.
1911.
1911, excuse me.
Well, did he remain with FWD or
No, he did not. 1911, he divested all his stock and interest and went back to the machine shop.
Yep. So yeah, that's why William is kind of the continuous piece here. It had nothing to do with FWD at this point, and this is but this is the start of Oshkosh, and this is why FWD, the push from FWD, to leave there is what pushed him to develop what became Oshkosh Truck. So on May 1st, 1917, the Wisconsin Duplex Auto Company was incorporated in Clintonville. And if you don't know, that it wasn't originally Oshkosh Truck, it was a Wisconsin Duplex Auto Company, and both.
That's before it became Oshkosh.
Correct. No, you're right. Yep. And believe it or not, both FWD and Wisconsin Duplex were in Clintonville, Wisconsin at the same time. They weren't producing any cars yet for Wisconsin Duplex Auto, but it was still based in Clintonville until they could find a new home. They had a little office in Clintonville. They were selling stock. There was a lot of interest around it, and I think because people who knew William and knew that this was his deal. It said, hey, this guy had success with FWD. Let's see what we can do about, following him. But it was under the Duplex Auto Company. And he just said, that's what we named it at that time. Had to name it something. They went on selling stock. We could deserve our stock now, and it was rapidly selling and growing nicely. So, and again, in 1917, while the stock was selling and the interest in the company was growing, two things were missing: a product and a production facility. So, just like William had done with the Battleship, make a prototype car, Mosley and him got talking, and it would be much easier to sell stock if we had an arrangement where we had a demonstrating car, same as we did with the Battleship, to show what we had. Well, he said, let's do it. I already designed a new type of car all the way through. So William was already thinking about how the design was going to come together, and had already started producing it. So, but you can see this. Clintonville's to have another auto factory. The concern is known as Wisconsin Duplex Auto. So imagine this little small town of Clintonville having two, having Oshkosh and FWD. It probably wouldn't have worked, but it's interesting to think about early on. So they decided to build this car off-site, and they found a machine shop down in Milwaukee. And so William and his oldest son, Sherrill, went down there and began doing it. He had checked this out before, and he said, so we decided we would go on and build this little car. I looked around and found a party on Mitchell Street in Milwaukee. They catered to this kind of business to build things like that. So I went down and looked them up, looked over the shop, all their tools, see if this equipment, see if they had the equipment to build this. I found that he had all the machines necessary to construct this first car. This is a picture of the building. I think you took this, right?
Yep. This is where they built the vehicle down in Milwaukee. The building still stands today. Part of it's apartments, and I'm not for sure what the garage door is.
So, anyway, it didn't look like this back then, but
Yeah, it was named the Andrews Motor Manufacturing Company in Milwaukee.
Yep. And so that's where they decided to build what's known as Old Betsy. And as the two of them hand built it from the ground up, they were able to find a lot of parts locally. So you could already see what an advantage it would be to build a car in a bigger metropolitan area where you had many more resources, especially other companies that could produce pieces of it that you could use. The key component for making this four-wheel drive was designed by William, for the chain-driven casing and the full-time transfer case. So the two pieces that were needed, just like the first the first patents that were pulled, they made themselves. But they had A.L. Smith that was based down there, and they just had the car frame fabricated by A.L. Smith. Leroy Motor Company was 3 miles away, and so they were able to source an engine just basically down the road. The transmission came from Fuller & Company, also based in Milwaukee. So there was an awful lot of resources that were available to help build this product. And again, because William had already done this with the Battleship, he understood what was involved with trying to develop a car from the ground up and what was needed.
A.L. Smith still exists.
Yes. Yeah.
And Old Betsy is named after Davy Crockett's rifle.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
All right. There we go. There we go. All right. So now they were still shopping it around. Mosling was still working on trying to sell stock and try to find a place to locate this, right? So Mr. Mosling stayed back in Clintonville, and he was selling stock for this and contacting chambers of commerce throughout Wisconsin because they still needed to have a home to actually fabricate and produce these vehicles. And he found support in Appleton and also in Oshkosh. And William recalls, Mosling kept in contact with the Chamber of Commerce, and that's in Oshkosh, and he was a bright fella. He knew how to handle them fellas. He couldn't put anything over on him. He knew just how to handle them. So he made arrangements with them that this car would be finished in the course of a couple weeks. So now William was under the gun because they wanted to see a presentation of this car. They wanted to have it, in the coming weeks. But one of the big things with selling, with selling the stock and making sure that the stock was there is making sure that the business climate in the communities was right. Oshkosh originally was approached by William when he was shopping around for FWD, and this is 5 years earlier. Well, Oshkosh was a lumber milling town, and there's plenty of lumber, and they said, no, we don't want to have you here. Don't even bother coming. The guy that was the head of the Chamber of Commerce, we're not interested. So they had an opportunity to get FWD. Well, 5 years later, because of the milling industry had changed, they were looking for a new industry that they could hold on to. So it just happened to be at the right time that they reapproached them and they said, yes, we would be very much interested in this. So Mosling had convinced a lot of the Oshkosh merchants and manufacturers to form a committee just so they could examine this, right? Because if you didn't have the business leaders involved, the people with money, then your business probably wasn't going to succeed, right? But it was starting to see a shift from the wood industry, which made the proposition of a new industry like this more attractive. Betsy departed Milwaukee, okay? So this all was in November 12th of 1917. They departed Milwaukee, and there's a whole story about this. I'm not going to go into detail, but imagine just producing a car, first time putting it out on the street, jumping a couple curbs and saying to your son, all right, no cab, no nothing, basically just a seat, a chassis, an engine. Drive that up to Oshkosh from Milwaukee, and we're gonna demonstrate this tomorrow. No testing, no nothing. So, I mean, it was a little nerve-wracking, right? You know, is this thing gonna make it? Could it break down? So Cheryl's like, all right, we'll do it. So, Cheryl Bezdick was behind the wheel as the pilot of this co-pilot was James Morrison, the stock salesman for Wisconsin Duplex Auto. It was reported in the Oshkosh paper that Mr. Morrison noted that the trip was made without mishap and any of sort of issues at any rate speed of about 30 miles an hour. So imagine what the roads were like at the time and doing 30 miles an hour in this thing, right? No fenders either, so I'm sure it was muddy and dirty and everything else, right? Also noted by Mr. Morrison is that the vehicle...
Oh, his battery is running low.
Hang on. Is this not plugged in?
Yeah, you got power.
150% tariff on those batteries.
There we go. All right. So the vehicle is a 1-ton type and is only the chassis and the engine. The vehicle is still green in production and it had not been experimented with in a manner before it was driven from Milwaukee to Oshkosh. So
were they sitting on 5-gallon pails? What were they doing?
You'll see a picture of it here in a little bit, but yes, I guess the whole point is, like, if you put it into context, it seems okay. So they just drove this vehicle up, but I mean, when you see what the vehicle looked like, I mean, there wasn't much to show. But they had to demonstrate it, right? Why spend the money on fitting it out until you demonstrate it and make sure that it works, right?
There were no DOT inspectors.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, December 12th, when they got up there, once arriving in Oshkosh around 10:30 a.m., the 1-ton vehicle was put through the paces. There was a technical committee there that was evaluating it and seeing what it could be done. One of the first tasks the vehicle was asked was to drive over a curb in front of the Hotel Athearn. Okay, big deal. It drove over a curb, right? So someone then pointed over and said, "Hey, what about the public library? They have a few more steps over there. Let's see what we can do about driving it up the steps, right?" So that's what they did, and that's the lowest set of stairs. You can see there's 5 of those, and then the upper having 12. It was reported by the local paper that the truck never stopped or wavered until it reached the top pillars the pillars at the top of the stairs. After the demonstration, the vehicle spent the night in a garage at Loper & Loper in Oshkosh before being driven to Appleton. So that was the first big test, and that's what sold it right there. If you go up those stairs with that vehicle, people started selling money, and we're gonna build it here. So. All right, and then this is when the announcement made that Wisconsin Duplex Auto Company will move from Clintonville to Oshkosh. So this was kind of where they decided, yes, Oshkosh is committed to it, and that was on December 19th. Now, this is also a demonstration that they did in Appleton, right? They said the friend of Cheryl's who rode with them, they had been in Appleton and said, hey, can we do a demonstration over in Appleton and show people? It's like, all right, let's do it. So brought it over to Appleton, right? And said, let's drive up these stairs. Now, there's a few more than, let's see, 12 plus 5, there's more than 17 stairs to go up in Appleton, right? So anyway, there's a picture of it. And this is one that you found, Tim. This is Tim's research. So that is what they drove from Milwaukee to Oshkosh at 30 miles an hour, and there they are going up these stairs as a demonstration. Only picture I've ever seen of this.
So this is the only picture. I ended up buying a photo album from a lady over in Indiana, of all places. She said she had some rare photos of Wisconsin Duplex Auto Company. I said, whatever, you're horse hockey. So she sent me one picture, and I could not show my cards and show faith, and I'm like, she does have pictures. This was one of the pictures that was in that photo album that I purchased from Indiana. We didn't know all about that photo album. I sent Chad a picture of one of them. Shyla, Chad's mom, he showed it to her.
We'll talk about that, yeah. No, so anyway, we got a few more in here. We'll get to that in a second. So December 26th, the first set of ads started showing up. On January 17th, the Wisconsin Duplex Auto Company amended their Articles of Association, now called Oshkosh, Wisconsin, their new home city. In 1918, first stockholders meeting was held on February 12th, and William Besserdick and Bernard Mosling were elected for a 3-year term. And then some of the other names here too, you can see. And that this is the city hall where they actually had the first meeting. So the company began the process of securing equipment and moves into space from the J.L. Clark Carriage Company. And so that's, there's a laser on this thing. Yeah, so that would be right there. That's part of the University of Oshkosh right now, right? Mm-hmm. So that's on the campus. It was all torn down. You see some pictures here. That's, they rented that. And there they are after starting to produce their vehicles. So you're going to see some great shots that Tim got. And this is early pictures of what Betsy looked like. So we didn't really know what it looked like. I hadn't seen any of these. It was pretty amazing when you found these. So
that looks like it could be pneumatic tires.
It is pneumatic tires.
It was when it was climbing the steps, I noticed.
Yes. So old Betsy was built with pneumatic tires.
That was kind of a big deal at the time, you know.
I couldn't imagine going
That
up
was
those
more
stairs
than
with a
state
car.
of the art.
Yeah. Well, and so there's another story too about that where they had blamed them for breaking, was the stairs at the library? Or was
Pearl
it
Street.
Pearl Street. Yeah, so those stairs, the long stretch, they had blamed them for breaking the stairs, going up those stairs. And they're like, well, wait a minute, we didn't break any stairs. Turns out that someone else said, well, I could do that with my car, had a little bit too much to drink, and decided to run right into it and break the stairs. No pneumatic tire. Even if they had pneumatic tires, it wouldn't matter. It didn't make it very far. So the tires actually did cushion quite a bit, because if they made it up all those stairs without damaging them, that was a lot to say. So you can see where some of these photos have been being tested out. One of the key factors was the body, the body on the back, right? So we'll see a few more here. But the idea was, well, they created this vehicle. How can we demonstrate it? Well, put people in it, right? So they had this, I guess it was an ambulance body that was put in the back, where they had rows of seats on either side so they could give people a ride through it and say, hey, come along, you can actually see what it's like. But you can see, just like they did with FWDs, that went through the trenches, went through the water, the muck, just to see what they could do. Went through the snow, went through the sand. But see, that was the auto body that they had put on the back of it later on, so they could use it as a demonstrator. Out in fields, drumming up business. That's what it was just the same way that the battleship was used as kind of the liaison for FWD. Betsy was used in the same way.
The tires are caked with mud.
Oh yeah, all the roads were mud at the time. So this is kind of an interesting side story too. So Tim sent me these photos, right? My mom was still alive at the time, but she was, fading a little bit. And we showed this picture, and I'm looking at this picture, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. This kind of looks familiar, right? And but I'm like, well, maybe that's not it. But it really looked familiar. And then realized that this shed, so my great-great-grandparents' farm, which was out in the country, just outside of Clintonville, this was a shed that this has been redone, but our farm that we'd grown up to as a little kid, I'm pretty darn sure that if you look between here, see the chimney in the back? Yeah, exactly. Yep. So it's just 7 miles outside of Clintonville. They were doing these tests, right? And I'm like, okay, wait a minute, that shed looked really familiar. Well, I started staring at it, right? And I don't know what you guys can see. There's this wheelbarrow back here, and I'm like, no way. My grandma had told me about this pile that's an old wheelbarrow right there, and this is at the farm, right? So I made a bench out of it, not even thinking about it. But if you go back, you take a look, you can see that piece right there. Is that piece right there? So anyway, just little fragments, how they kind of come together. But I never knew that this was out at the farm, So here, some of these tests were done outside of Clintonville, for the photo shoots. So anyway, if you want to talk about
this is a rare photo. I did show it yesterday. But what makes this so rare? This is at 515 High Street in Oshkosh. This is the building that they rented from the J.L. Clark Manufacturing Company. This right here is B.A. Mosling, the co-founder. This is his father. We call him Johann, but it's John Mosling, This is Sherrill Besserdick, William's son. This is William Besserdick. This is the only photo known to exist in existence. The company doesn't even have it. Of the four founders, basically here. This guy here is A.C. Miller. I'm not for sure who this guy is, but I'll figure it out one of these days. But this was the only photo known to exist. Oshkosh Corporation is a great supporter of me, and we're trying to figure out how to kind of unveil this photo to everybody. So you kind of seen a little bit of the technical data of Old Betsy. That's actually the parts manual for a Leroy 2C engine that's part of my collection. During the 2017 and the 100th anniversary of Oshkosh Truck, the company, the old timer that you've seen there at the beginning, Clarence Inky Youngworth, was an engineer there. He had a 72-year career with Oshkosh Truck. He come after World War II. He got hired there September 4th, 1945. Clarence and I, Inky is what I call him, we're best friends over 20-some years. He was my mentor. So as they started, he was truly Mr. Oshkosh. And as they started diving into Old Betsy, they were asking him questions. He goes, I don't know, I was born in 1919, but I know somebody that can help you, somebody that's really done a lot of research. So I actually overnighted this book up to Oshkosh so they could start using it to rebuild the engine. This is the transfer case off of Old Betsy as they were starting to redo it. So it was very cool. I come up several times as they were rebuilding it, gave them instruction, gave them some help on really doing this. The fuel capacity at the tank was 35 gallons, which I thought was very impressive for 1917. It was underneath the seat. So they had some forethought in, we want this thing to be able to drive long distances to be able to do this.
Did you see the chain?
Yep, how thick it is. And I have more pictures of it. I just didn't add these into the slide in the PowerPoint. This is still at J.L. Clark Manufacturing Company. I can still point out some of this. This is B.A. Mosling. This gentleman over here to the left is Frank Sullivan. He come with them from Clintonville. Frank was one of the first plant managers for FWD, and he was the first plant manager for Oshkosh. Frank is the one. Frank Sullivan helped design the new building that they were building. So these pictures here are still from, and I got to point it out right there, is Sherrill Besserdick, William's son. We weren't for sure Sherrill's involvement. I'd seen this guy in hundreds of pictures, had no clue what he was until Shyla said that's Uncle Sherrill and some photos that we sent. So again, Sherrill Besserdick, this is their first prototype, and if you really look at it, you can see the C-clamps up there holding basically the firewall together. But this was their first production, first prototype coming off the assembly line in Oshkosh. Kind of cool, you know, they just loaded up with what I can only assume potato sacks. Maybe it's got some rocks in it, but.
Bodies.
Yeah, bodies. So this was taken at the JLG, or the J.L. Clark Manufacturing Company. They finally got a little bit more. One key component is they started building trucks that had cabs on it. You've seen the pneumatic tires, now we have cabs. The thing about J.L. Clark, they were a carriage company. They knew how to do wood. So Clark started building and manufacturing the cabs for the Oshkoshes. So you'll see almost every Oshkosh that come off the assembly line, unless they didn't want it, had a cab on it. Wisconsin winters that protected the drivers and the passenger. Again, this was the first plant that they rented in Oshkosh when they come to town, just off the Fox River over by UW. Here's some great pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And
Slide said that's when the name changed.
No, that was, yeah, sorry, that should be
1918,
yeah.
it does. So great point. Thanks, Jeff, for pointing that out. So what happened is there was two things. Everybody thinks that they renamed the company just because they were in Oshkosh. They didn't. There was already another company that used the word Wisconsin, and motor company and duplex and all that. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to make the name unique. So that was the first problem, the first thing that why they changed the name. The second one, everybody thinks that they wanted to honor the city. Not really. They just knew that they had to add a truck into the name. That's what they started building. So they actually took the city of Oshkosh's name and made it Oshkosh Motor Truck Manufacturing Company. Some inside shots, pretty rudimentary factory whenever they were doing this. And as you can see in the background over here to the left, all the cabs that J.L. Clark had built for them, ready to start doing it. Some really cool shots from just inside. A lot of these photos come from Frank Sullivan and his family. But the factory, they started to realize was too small. There's Frank Sullivan right there. This guy, his last name is Wolf. So a couple of them I've been able to identify just starting to do some research. Every vehicle had pneumatic tires. The Goodyear truck was sitting there to deliver the tires. Model A. This was their first production truck that had come off the assembly line.
What year?
1918, 1919. The first truck actually rolled off the assembly line in 1919.
19.6 horsepower.
Pretty impressive, wasn't it, for the date? This is an actual blueprint that's part of my collection. It is of the Model A. And if you look at it, one thing that Oshkosh had started to do is the engineer had to sign off on it. So if you look down here in the bottom right, FJS, Frank Sullivan. And the date on that is 3/27 of 1919. So the first truck, that first truck that we seen in those pictures went to Snyder Brothers and Motter in Winneconne, Wisconsin. Just happened into happenstance. I picked up 3 very old binders with letters like this and with pictures of each truck that they delivered. I think there's over 50 some pictures of the first trucks that were delivered along with letters. With some research and some stuff like that, I was able to locate which truck was built first, and it was this one. So there's the picture. And that's of the actual photograph that was taken back in the early 1900s. I'm still trying to find that truck. Nobody in Winneconne knows where it's at, but I'll find it one of these days in a scrapyard probably. March 7th, 1920, again, they're starting to run out of room. And if you look up here in the top corner up here, south side busy to clinch plant. They wanted to stay in Oshkosh, and they had found some property that was a farm that was going to be, it was called the Glatz Farm, and it's on the southern end of town. 1920, their conferences are being held, how we come up with the money to keep Oshkosh in here. We love it. They're doing well for the city. Again, like Chad had said, the lumber industry had dried up, and they thought this was going to be the next greatest thing for Oshkosh, was this big truck manufacturing company. So they ended up buying several acres. This is Oregon Street here, Waupun Road here. This is where they'd settled on. It was south of town, and it was actually in the county at the time. So they had to annex into it, but right here is where they were going to build the factory. Aller and Jensen, I actually have the original blueprints of the company when they built it when they started construction in 1920 to build this. Frank J. Sullivan was the lead design of the thing. Back then they wanted sawtooth roof. That way they didn't have to really rely on a lot of energy, but they had sunlight. Most of it was an 8-hour shift during the daytime, and it faced south. That way they could have sunlight coming into the plant. This is a groundbreaking, May 4th, 1920. This is when they broke ground. And this is actually an actual copy of the newspaper print. And Chad and I discussed this, and one thing that we didn't see that William wasn't in the picture. I'm going to surprise Chad. William was in the picture.
I was wondering if that was him or not. I don't know.
So, yeah. So the families are in there. That's B.A. Mosling right there. That's John Mosling. There's William right there. This is it. The lumber coming in, laid out, just a farm field. Nothing. Here it is, midway through the construction, the saw roof. What I always thought was cool, and I don't know the story on this, they put a car in the back of an Oshkosh. Probably another advertising stunt just to haul it around.
Is that building still in existence?
It is. It's still part of Oshkosh Corporation, and I might have a photo in here that shows exactly what they did. Is they in the late 70s, early 80s, they built a structure over the original plant. But unfortunately, in 1920, John Mosling passes away unexpectedly. Here's the building.
Which way is that facing?
That way. Towards Oregon Street. This is Oregon Street's right here in the front. So this is the south side of the building, the north side of the building, and that's going to the east towards, yep.
Usually the steep side is the windows, that's facing north.
So early on, fire departments come to them and wanted fire trucks to be built. They actually ended up building, I do believe, 12 of them. I have the serial numbers for 10 of them. The community of Oshkosh was a bigger purchaser of them. But in the first year of production, they built one, 1917. As you can see, they built two in 1918, and so forth. So when 1920, when they were started to building the plant, they had built 203. 1921, it got up to 265. As we kind of talked about old Betsy up at the farm, this is what she looked like in the mid-60s. This is Inky's photograph. For many years, it sat outside in despair and dismay on the old farm. They still kept the barn back in the day.
They were stripping it for parts.
Yes and no. But this is what it looked like in 2010. Old Betsy, the first time that it was remanufactured or had some love and attention to it was in 1967 for the company's 50th anniversary. The gentleman that restored it, his name was Jim Kelleher. Unfortunately, he passed away, but Jim was one of the engineers of the company. So this is what it looked like in 2010.
To raise stock, it was built at Andrews Motor Manufacturing Company, Betsy.
Yes.
They didn't have a factory.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So this is what old Betsy looks like today after it was redone. Unfortunately, just because some of the pieces and some of the parts were worn and tethered, it's got new metal. It's got new here, the stake bed, new wood and stuff like that, but the mechanisms are all the same. They're still there. The engine's still the same, transmission, the differential, and everything else is still the same, but they wanted to modernize it a little bit just because of the aging infrastructure of the wood. When they started to take it apart, they were finding that the wood being some 100 years old. What was that? A very early ad. Makes sense. That looks just like old Betsy. First, they talked about building cars. This was an early ad. I believe this was maybe the first ad to come out whenever they first relocated to Oshkosh and renamed the company. That's the Winneconne truck right on the front of it. If anybody has one of these, I will give you good money for that. I don't have this one in my collection. This was another early advertisement. There's reproductions from 1974 of this, but in order to find the original, if it says Oshkosh Motor Truck Manufacturing Company, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, that's an original from 1919, 1920. The reproduction says, down here at the bottom says, goes anywhere the wheels will take you. I wanted to point this out. Some in the room, try and talk about Oshkosh and pairing the two companies together. But I will have to say, if you look at this and you look at that, I think that was Williams' little thing of saying we can do it better. So this was an early FWD type ad, and this is one that was later done by Oshkosh. So this picture was taken by my son. This is my dear friend, Clarence Inky Youngworth, that worked for the company, 72 years as an engineer. I'm right here behind him, keeping an eye on him. I was gonna ride on old Betsy during the parade for the 100th anniversary. I won't tell anybody, but there's oil dripping out of that. So all of us behind watched old Betsy to make sure it didn't lose all the oil. There was a plan just in case if it did stop, that there was a tow rope and the vehicle in front of it was going to tow it. But, you know, Inky loved the company. He worked there 72 years, was hired by B.A. Mosling to do that. Yeah, what a godsend. And that's how I knew or know the majority of my stuff, was all the years that I would sit down there and pick his brain. At this time, we'll entertain questions for either Chad or for myself. Yes, sir.
On that Leroy engine, do you know what that C2 stood for, where they got that designation?
I do not. There's a gentleman in Missouri that's a Leroy expert, and we've had some conversations, and I've learned a lot from him, but again, he doesn't know what that C2 designation, because back then Leroy was making all kinds of engines. So we believe that they downsized a little bit to make this engine for old Betsy.
What made that area so famous in engine building in the part of Wisconsin along the lake? And everybody tells me, oh, well, it was because of the iron and the foundries. No, we had iron and foundries in Cleveland and
Just because of the
everywhere.
beer.
What?
It's because of the beer.
The beer and the brats.
That's a problem.
There are so many engine builders in Wisconsin, and especially along the lake. It's just amazing. I mean,
For many, a lot of people don't realize just what Wisconsin represented to the automotive industry.
no kidding.
You know, there's a lot of companies, unfortunately, that are no longer in existence. You know, there's trucks out here, you know, Sterling, that was made in Wisconsin. You know, it's pretty cool to see those. That's one of the reasons, you know, of having the ATHS event here in Wisconsin, is because of the, you know, their pioneerism for vehicles.
Any idea what happened to Leroy? Did Waukesha buy, or how did it?
Ask me questions about Oshkosh Truck or FWD, I can answer them.
So,
But go ahead, Chad.
no, from what we found out, it was absorbed. You know, I think it was around until maybe the 50s. But even this, when we were looking into it, the engine that they could get here, you're right, I think it was undersized. They had a hard time. The Leroy engine wasn't what they wanted. Okay, that wasn't their initial engine of choice, but it was close by. They were able to get some, you know, and so they had to go with that because it was there. But Leroy was doing pump engines. They were doing, you know, tractor engines. So things weren't that size. And then eventually they just got absorbed. So.